All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning.
We're going to turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 6. We're just going to continue through the book of Ecclesiastes. And again, if the Lord wills, and if I have opportunity before our pastor comes in and takes over, I will do my best to get through the book of Ecclesiastes with everyone. But we're going to start in chapter 6 this morning, and hopefully get a little bit into chapter 7. Chapter 6 is actually, as you're going to see this as we get through, it is reiterating and restating a lot of the concepts, ideas, and thoughts that have already been stated previously in the book of Ecclesiastes. Repetition has a purpose. It has a value. It has a reason, right? Concepts and thoughts that are repeated often, it's meant to be something that you remember and that you take in, that you understand. Additionally, restating something in a different way also has a purpose, because we all understand and learn things differently, right? So where something's said one way might click for one person, then saying it another way might click for another person. And so don't ever be put off or taken aback by the fact that as you're working your way through a book of the Bible, or anything you're trying to learn really, that something's restated. To you it might seem, oh, that's so obvious, you just said this a different way. But for somebody else, that restatement in a different way may really help them to understand. And for you, that restatement, even though you feel like you just heard it, may help you remember it. So the Bible says in Ecclesiastes chapter 6, starting here in verse 1, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men. So he's about to say something here, but again, understand this is the observations of a man who has gone through all of the experiences and all of the pleasures and all of the understandings that we can have here in this life. In as much as anyone can experience everything, and there is no experiencing everything. I mean, obviously, you learn this as you go through life. You're not going to get a chance to experience everything you could ever want to experience. Nobody does. Nobody gets to. The richest man on earth doesn't get to see everything he wants to see in life. They're always striving for another thing, always looking for. I mean, the two richest men on earth today are spending massive amounts of money to go to space, because that's somewhere that they still haven't been, right? You could have everything in the world, and there's always more things you want to explore. But Solomon here, as much as a person can or could at that time, had experienced everything there was to experience. And so he's speaking from his observations here. There's an evil which I have seen under the sun. It is common among men. And so this is a thing that he sees a lot of. It's a common thing. It's an expected or normal thing. It says, a man to whom God hath given riches, wealth, and honor, so that he wanteth nothing for his soul of all that he desireth. Yet God giveth him not power to eat thereof, but a stranger eateth it. This is vanity, it is an evil disease. So what he says here is, God will give somebody everything materially that a person could have, and yet he doesn't get a chance to enjoy any of it, right? It makes you think of the rich man and Lazarus, right? Jesus' story there in the New Testament, when he talks about this rich man, and hang on, I think am I mixing up two different stories here? Tonight thy soul shall be required of thee, right? It is two different stories. Sorry, I'm combining them. But the rich man who laid up all of the good that he had, he worked hard, and you can imagine this guy worked hard, he saved, he poured himself into his effort, and he's like, all right, I've got everything I want, now I'm going to take it easy and rest. And God says to him, you fool, right? You fool. You've poured your life into these material things, and you're not going to get to enjoy any of it, right? And that's what Solomon talks about here. People who are blessed, and he says God hath given, right? This isn't talking about just purely material. I mean, this person is blessed with these things by God's will, but he does not gain advantage of it. When it says evil here, this is not talking about wickedness. This is talking about a bad happening, something that happens that is negative, right? The word evil does not always mean to do something sinful or to do something wicked. When you talk about evil befalling somebody, it means something bad happening to them. So, and he says it's vanity, you know. You work and you are blessed and you gain all of these things, but then you die and somebody else gets to enjoy all that you gained, right? Verse 3 says, if a man beget 100 children and live many years, so that the days of his years be many, and his soul be not filled with good, and also that he have no burial, I say that an untimely birth is better than he. And so if a man is lives a long time and has all the children that he could have, but his soul is not filled with good, right? His soul is not filled with enjoying the things that God has given him, with living a life that is pleasing to God, but is also a life of joy and a life of value and worth, then it'd be better to die at birth. It'd be better to be stillborn or to die as an infant, right? It says, for he, that's talking about this one who is stillborn in verse 4. For he cometh in vanity and departeth in darkness, his name shall be covered with darkness. Moreover, he hath not seen the sun nor known anything. This hath more rest than the other. It says, you could live as long as you want, have all the things that you want, have all the kids, have all the life experiences that people want and desire, and your soul is not filled with good, right? You don't live life in the joy and walk with God, which we're going to see here as we work through Ecclesiastes. That's what he's talking about. The enjoyment of the company of companions and friends, which he's talked about already. The simple taking pleasure in both the work and blessings that God has given you, which he's talked about all throughout this book. If you live life with all the material blessings that a person could imagine, but you don't have those internal things, then it would be better not to have lived at all. It would be better to have been born and then died, because there's more rest in that. And if you're not doing those things, then this whole mess of a life in this fallen world is just not worth it, right? Those are the things that make life worth living. It says, this hath more rest than the other. Verse 6 says, yea, though he live 1,000 years twice told, so 2,000 years, yet hath he seen no good. Do not all go to one place? Now here, when it's talking about go to one place, this isn't talking about our eternal destination. This isn't talking about heaven and hell. This is talking about the grave. This is talking about death, right? We all die. We all meet our end. And so, even if you lived 1,000 years in the scope of human history, what is that, right? Even if you lived 1,000 years in the scope of eternity, what is that? If you had everything that a person could want, but then your life is not filled with good, right? Filled with a focus and a dwelling and a living in the good things that God has given us, and truly taking joy in what God wants us to take joy in, then what's the point of it? We're all gonna die anyway, right? All the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not filled. We work to feed ourselves, but the appetite, our desires are never full, never satisfied by nature. For what hath the wise more than the fool? What hath the poor that knoweth to walk before the living? It's the experience of life, outside of these things that we're to take joy in. If you just look at it through the material lens, there's no advantage one over the other. There's no point. There's no purpose. And I'm going to say this. Some people are more wired for a nihilistic outlook than other people are, right? Because for some people, you say, what's the point of it all? And they don't, that's not even a question they naturally ask, right? So some people don't think that way. But some people do. I'm wired that way, Things can seem very pointless, and so God's always spoken to me through the book of Ecclesiastes because Solomon understands that, right? God uses Solomon to illustrate, there is a way of thinking here, and there is a truth there, but there is a truth beyond that truth, right? And that's what he talks about. You get to a place in life where you look at it and say, what's the point of it all? What's the worth of it all? What's the value of it all? And God says through the book of Ecclesiastes, you're thinking right, but you're not going far enough. There's another step beyond that where you understand that there are these things that do matter and do have value in this life, even if everything else seems pointless, right? Even if everything else seems pointless, the love of friends and family, that matters. It really does. The simple taking joy in the blessings that God has given you, be they great or small, that matters. It really does. The following after God with everything that you've got and with everything that's in you, that matters. It really does. And so for some of us, we have to get to a point of seeing the pointlessness to get through that, to seeing the purpose in life beyond that. And so the book of Ecclesiastes walks us through that. Verse 9 says, better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. I will speak clearly and always tell you when it's something I think this is what it means, rather than I can say with confidence this is what it means. What I think this means is that it's better to see and enjoy the things that you can see that are really here around you than to live your life in wandering desires, fantasizing about things that you desire. So, for example, people fantasize about the places they could go and see around the world. And it's not wrong to travel around the world and to go see things. I think it's a worthy endeavor as God gives you opportunity to go see some things in this world. But how much better is it to take opportunities to go see things that are amazing that you can see, rather than fantasize about, it's like we fantasize about going and seeing the Himalayas when we've got the Cascades right outside our window, right? We obsess over and fantasize over and wander in escapism, thinking about things that we could be enjoying if we had the money or the opportunity or the time. And when there are things that God has given us opportunity to enjoy in our lives that are right around us, and better is the sight of the eyes. Better is that thing that we can go see than the wandering of the desire. And so I'm not saying here that imagination is bad. What I'm saying is that imagination that dwells on and leads to longing for things that you're not going to have the opportunity to have, that's a hurtful thing, and it's a thing that'll drain the joy from your life, when instead you could be letting your desire wander to things that you can then follow through on, right? Again, that's my understanding as I read that verse. Somebody else may have a better understanding of that. Verse 10 says, "That which hath been is named already, and it is known that it is man. Neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. Seeing there be many things that increase vanity, what is man the better? For who knoweth what is good for man in this life, all the days of his vain life which he spendeth as a shadow? For who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun?" This is, again, another passage that brings us to a very stark understanding of the limitations of our own lives. Says there's many things that increase vanity. There's so many things out there that don't mean anything, and why are we the better for any of it, right? Who knoweth what's good for man in this life? Who can tell us that we see around us what's going to be good or better out of people? Because the person who tells you what's better, they don't know what's going to come after them, right? And they're not going to know, right? We're going to die, and we don't get to know what's going to happen here after that. Now I don't know what in an eternal sense. I don't know what we get to see or what we don't get to see. And the Bible's very much not clear about that. I don't think we're supposed to worry too much about it. But what I do know is that I have no guarantee of seeing what's going to come after, and that being the case, another person whose scope of wisdom and understanding of this world, right, whose scope of ability to recognize what's going on and to truly take in and understand everything is limited to the span of their own life, right? They might have some interesting thoughts, but they don't have eternal wisdom to give. This book has eternal wisdom to give, and I can trust that. But thinking too much about my own thoughts or about other people's thoughts, dwelling too much on those things and the wisdom of men, that can all lead to vanity and to vexation, as the Bible says. So we'll get into chapter 7 here. Chapter 7 is a shift in tone a little bit. We get a little bit of a shift here where he begins talking about some points of wisdom. As you read through it, actually, you're going to get a reflection of Proverbs a little bit. There's the feel in chapter 7 gets into the sort of list of points of wisdom that the book of Proverbs is made up of. But again, these are all in theme and in keeping with what the book of Ecclesiastes is talking about, where the book of Proverbs is very broad and talks about every topic under the sun. Ecclesiastes is much narrower in focus. So verse 1 says, "A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth." And so it says two things here. A good name is better than precious ointment. A good name is better than. So when we talk about ointment, we're talking about things that bring healing or refreshing, right? And a good name is better than that. So I imagine, a parallel property. A good name is something that heals hurts. Good name is something that salves wounds, right? The day of death than the day of one's birth. And so, again, a very stark way of looking at things. But what somebody's life has been worth on the day that they pass away, right? You can total and understand and recognize the sum total of their story on this earth, the entire arc of their life on their day of passing. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will lay it to his heart. It says it's better to go to the house of mourning. We're talking here about when he says the house of mourning, in sort of a general metaphorical way. It's talking about place of funeral, or the place of burial, the place of mourning, where people would go when somebody was being sent off, I guess. And it says it's better to go to that place of mourning than place of celebration, for that is the end of all men, right? The living will lay it to his heart. It's important for us to recognize and to lay that to heart. There's a concept, philosophical concept, and again, this is across the broad scope of Western philosophy. If anybody's ever heard of the concept of memento mori, it's a phrase, Latin phrase, means remember that all men die, right? If you look at paintings throughout, you know, from medieval ages throughout the Renaissance, self-portraits people painted often had, there's a common image of a self-portrait with a skull somewhere in the image, sitting on somebody's desk or just in the shadows somewhere. And the term for that was a memento mori. It's a reminder or a remembrance that life is limited, that we all have one end. And it's a common thought in different schools of philosophy here. You know, it's something that that again Stoicism would talk about, and other schools of philosophy. But the interesting thing is all of these different ideas of philosophy, Western philosophy, and everything like that, they started what, 300-400s BC. This was written when was the book of Ecclesiastes written? In the 900s BC, centuries before these Greek philosophers were building the building blocks of what would become Western philosophy. God, through Solomon, was talking about this concept and the understanding that this life here on earth is limited, that we have the time that we have, and that we're supposed to live in understanding of that. You know, young people don't think that way naturally. It's one of those transitions that we make as we start to get older, right? You get into it's frankly, it's one of those transitions that marks adulthood, right? The difference between thinking as a child and thinking as an adult is the understanding, the realization that the time that you have on this earth is the time that you have. And living in light of that limitation, recognizing and understanding it brings you into reality, right? Because if you're not living in that realization, if you're instead living in escapism and seeking just whatever pleasure you can find, living, they talk about living for the moment, and I'm not against living in the moment, right? But you know, living in reality, but there's also just trying to pass the time and expecting things to continue as they will. Even if you're not consciously doing that, you can live that way when you're not thinking about reality around you and the time that you have on earth. So it's an important thing to bring to reality. It's another thing to consider, and this is something that is true for me as it is for anybody. Modern Western culture has an aversion to mourning and has an aversion to the acknowledgement of death. It has. Have you noticed that that funerals are a thing of the past? You notice that in modern culture, most people don't do funerals anymore. We do little memorial services. They're kind of quick, you know, get past them, and I understand the purpose of that, and you know the idea of celebrating life and things like that is good. But a lot of times, you know, it's a short memorial service. If your family doesn't come, then that's okay, and we don't dwell on or live in that mourning the loss of a person anymore. In this culture, people avoid it. And there's something there's something there, and I don't have quite the words to say about this, but there's something there that we're missing in the way that we relate to that, and we avoid thinking about the limitations of our life, the ending of our time. We avoid thinking about that, and it's easy to avoid thinking about that because there's so many distractions and so many things to focus on and so much entertainment and so many things that we can take in to live a different life than the one we're living. And again, I'm not against entertainment. I like books, I like TV shows, I like video games, but we live in those things rather than living in the life that we're given. Verse 3 says, sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance the heart is made better. There's an interesting parallel here, because in the book of Proverbs it says that merry heart doeth good like a medicine, right? And so laughter and joy is also a healing thing, and the Bible tells us that. But sorrow is also a healing thing. And there's a time, we think back to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, right? There's a time for each, right? There's a time to be merry and to be enjoying things and to be happy and to be excited. There's a time to be sad and to hurt and to be filled with sorrow. And the heart that doesn't do those things in their proper time and place is a heart that's sick, right? In avoiding sorrow, in avoiding negative emotion, in avoiding hurt, what we often do is we wall up our hearts, and we keep tight control over our emotions. We try to supplant and suppress negative emotions with positive things and with pleasures, and cover up the sorrow that we might feel. But when you do that, you'll sicken yourself. You harm your own heart and your ability to process emotion the way God designed us to. And so sorrow is something that we need, and it's something that is healing in the right time and place. Verse 4 says, the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. Again, there's right time for a merry heart and for these pleasures, but foolish people seek after nothing but pleasure. They seek to only experience pleasure and joy and happiness. Verse 5, here we have another shift here in conversation. It's better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This also is vanity. So it's better to hear from the wise, even if it's something you don't want to hear, even if it's correction, even if it's rebuke, than to join in the laughter of people who are not paying attention to the world around them, or trying living life in any way that's worthwhile, just trying to pour pleasure over the hurts of this world. He says it's the crackling of the thorns under a pot. So if you've ever burned like thorn bushes or thorny branches in a fire, you know that thorns get dried out and they crackle and pop when they're burned. That's what he's talking about. It's just crackling and popping of a thing that burns and doesn't matter, doesn't last or continue to exist. Verse 7 says, surely oppression maketh a wise man mad, and a gift destroyeth the heart. He says in the beginning of that, oppression makes a wise man mad. And so oppression, that is, whether that's political or whether that's within power structures of any sort, people are maddened by it. Oppression will make them feel like they're losing sense. And so it's something to be careful of and to understand. It says, a gift destroyeth the heart. And so it's talking about corruption, right? It's not just talking about giving of gifts. It's talking about in the sense of corruption. Gifts swaying people's hearts. And so if you're in a position of authority, you have to be careful about gifts. You have to be careful about people swaying your heart with things that are outside the bounds of what is pure, or what is trying to think of the right word, the opposite of corrupt. Fair and balanced. But verse 8 says, better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof. And the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. So he says, better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof. The ending of a thing, to understand, to see the ending, is better than the beginning of it. You know, there's a thing that we do, that I do. I don't know who else is like this, but I'm really good at starting stuff. Right? Really good at getting started. I like to go to the gym. I haven't been in the gym in weeks. Right? I like to lift. I'm really good at starting lifting. I'm really good at getting started, and man, it feels good to get in the swing of things. But it's better to reach a goal than just to get started on the path of a goal. And we all enjoy that process of getting on the path, right? It's something that brings us pleasure. It's something that brings excitement. The path in the middle is hard sometimes. It's hard to keep going. But what he says here is the ending. You know how excited you felt at the beginning of that process, that joy that you felt getting started on a big dream or a big goal, and that joy that you feel when you're setting forth on an adventure. The ending of it's even better than that, right? A lot of us don't see the endings of things. We don't even experience that. We know how good the beginning is, so we have a lot of beginnings. And you know, what the Bible says here is you know, if you have a lot of endings, right, a lot of things that you finish, that's going to be even better than having a lot of things that you start. It says, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. This is in the same verse here. It's in the same sentence. It's important to understand here. The patient in spirit continues through things even when they get hard, right? Because of the knowledge and patience that comes from knowing the joy at the end of a thing. The proud in spirit gets really hyped up about starting things. You know, yeah, I'm a weightlifter because I started lifting at the gym a couple of times, and you know, I'm a little bit of a power lifter. That feels good to say that when I haven't gotten into the gym for a couple of weeks, and only a couple of times since the baby was born 8 months ago. So, you know, it's a thing that feeds the pride to say you've started on something, to make that part of your identity. But the patient in spirit continues in those things that are good, knowing that the end of it is more joyful than that beginning even was. Verse 9 says, be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools. This is a simple verse. This is not one that's hard to interpret. That's pretty clear. Don't be quick to be angry. Don't be quick to lose your temper. Don't be quick to fly off the handle. Don't lose control quickly. Don't be angry quickly. You know, being angry isn't the same as losing your temper or losing your cool, right? I'm not a person who loses my temper quickly. My wife's seen me lose my temper, what, 3-4 times our entire marriage? 3-4 times. I've been married almost 14 years. I've lost my temper 3 or 4 times. And so I'm not quick to lose my temper, but you know what? I get angry pretty quick. I just bury it pretty effectively most of the time. But, you know, it says, be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry. It's not talking about being quick to lose your temper, although that's part of it. If you're quick to lose your temper, then you're definitely under this category. But being quick to be angry in your spirit. And here, anger resteth in the bosom of fools. It means anger resides in their heart. Foolish people hold anger in their hearts, right? And that's been me too many times, too often. Too much part of my nature. God have mercy on that. Verse 10 says, "Say not thou, what is the cause that the former days were better than these? For thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this." There's nothing wrong with nostalgia. There's nothing wrong with looking back and saying, man, those were good times. But you know what? People live in the past. People live in their own past. There's a thing that people do where they look back at their own life. Man, those were some good times. Why were those times so much better than right now? I wish I was back there. It's not wise. It's not wise to dwell on that. It's not wise to live in that. But you know what? There's another side to this which I think is applicable, which is a lot of people looking back to previous times in the past and saying, oh, those were better times. I wish I lived then instead of now. I wish I lived in the 1950s. I wish I lived in the 1930s. I wish I lived in the Renaissance. I wish I lived in medieval times. I wish I lived in the Wild West. I've heard all of those kinds of things, right? There's even people who wish they lived in pre-ancient times and Stone Age tribalistic kind of a lifestyle, right? And and some of the things that they look at, that you can look at and say, well, this thing about cultures has changed and it doesn't match or mesh with the way humans were supposed to be. There's a reason that this way of living is draining the joy from my life, and the way they lived then is more in keeping with the way God made us. And you're not always wrong about that. But you are wrong or unwise to spend your time dwelling on those past times. You live in the time you live in, right? You live in the phase of your life that you live in. You live in the time in history that you live in. And dwelling on what another time was like, either in your own life or in the history of mankind, it's not a wise place to live, any more than wishing you lived in other circumstances, wishing you lived in a different place. Why wasn't I born in a rich family? Why don't I live in this place or that place? Why don't I live in this time or that time? It's dwelling on things that can't be, that aren't, instead of living to the best of your ability and to the greatest of your joy in the life that God has given you. Let's continue. Verse 11 says, "Wisdom is good with an inheritance, and by it there's profit to them that see the sun. For wisdom is a defense, and money is a defense. But the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them that have it." So wisdom is good with an inheritance. And so verse 11 is saying, inheritance is good. Money is good. It's not bad, not morally good. I'm not saying that it's telling you that it's morally good, but it has its place and it has its purpose. It has its value. It says wisdom is a defense and money is a defense. There are things that wisdom defends against, and there's things that money and finances will defend against. But the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them that have it. And so he's comparing here wisdom versus finances, knowledge versus money. And he says, the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them that have it. Wisdom gives life. Money can't do that, right? It's not that money is bad or evil. The love of money is the root of all evil, but money itself is just an amoral thing. It's just a part of life. But money has its place and its purpose. It defends against certain things, gives you certain things. But wisdom gives life, right? Verse 13 says, "Consider the work of God, for who can make that straight which he hath made crooked?" God does things. We can't change the things God has done, right? That which God accomplishes, man cannot defeat. Verse 14, "In the day of prosperity be joyful, but in the day of adversity consider. God also hath set the one over against the other, to the end that man should find nothing after him." says, in the day of prosperity, rejoice, be joyful. And in the day of adversity, consider that God provided both. And God is the one who's behind both things. The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away, as the book of Job says, right? And God set the one against the other. He's the one who creates both of them. We don't get to see what's beyond ourselves. All things have I seen in the days of my vanity. There is a just man that perisheth in his righteousness. There is a wicked man that prolongeth his life in his wickedness. You're going to see in life people who are really good people suffering. And you're going to see in life people who are really bad people who seem like they're doing really well. And that is a thing that you're going to see in this world as you're watching and as you're observing. And it might seem unjust. And we're not supposed to be shocked or surprised by that. God knows. He's the one in charge. He's the one in control, right? Verse 16 says, be not righteous overmuch, neither make thyself overwise. Why shouldest thou destroy thyself? Be not overmuch wicked, neither be thou foolish. Why shouldest thou die before thy time? Verse 16 and verse 17 are held in balance or contrast here. When it says here, be not righteous overmuch, nor be overwise, nor make thyself overwise. It's not talking about doing right. Well, don't do too much right. But it is talking about your self-perception, the way you carry yourself, the way you think about yourself, the way you focus your life. I think things like self-righteousness and religious arrogance fall under this category. There's a lot of arrogant religious people who think that they are more than they are and need to have some humility. I think also religious, if you know the term, asceticism, right? The pursuit of things in life that aren't of true moral value, but that make you feel like you have moral value in doing them. That pouring your life into those things. We can look in the book of Colossians, I believe. God just brought this to mind. If we look at Colossians chapter 2, verse 20, wherefore if you be dead with Christ from the rudiments of the world, why, as though living in the world, are you subject to ordinances? Touch not, taste not, handle not, which all are to perish at the using, after the commandments and doctrines of men, which things have indeed a show of wisdom, and will worship and humility and neglecting of the body, not in any honor to the satisfying of the flesh. There are things that we treat as commands or ideas that when we pursue after them, they are a materialistic view of what righteousness is, right? When we pursue after a materialistic, earthly focused view of what righteousness is, we destroy ourselves. We pour ourselves into these physical things, missing the spiritual thing that is beyond them. And then the verse 17, and we'll be done. Be not overmuch wicked, neither be thou foolish. Why shouldst thou die before thy time? Wickedness and foolishness put you in danger. And you put yourself in danger of shortening the life that God has given you when you live your life unto those things. And sure, we can all see examples of people who have lived lives of hedonism and wickedness, who've lived long lives and seem to be doing pretty good. But those people are always the exception, right? Those people are always noteworthy because, oh man, I would have thought that guy'd be dead by now, right? And you can always look at dozens and, dozens, and if you're looking at the celebrities of this world, the actors, the musicians, the people in those categories, there are certain people who have a certain reputation, have lived a certain kind of lifestyle, and you look at them and you say, oh, I'm amazed that person's still alive. The reason you're amazed that person's still alive is because they all had groups of people that they hung out with and did all those things with who are also celebrities, and most of those people are not living anymore, right? And so for every person who's living a wicked lifestyle you can point to, who's lived a really long life doing it, there's 10 or 15 people that you can look at who destroyed themselves, who wasted the potential God has given them, who threw away the talents that God had created them with, who destroyed the life that God had given them through wicked living and through foolishness. And that's just all over the place. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. And Lord willing, I'll have a chance to continue through the rest of the chapter. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this morning. I thank you for all that you've done for us and all that you've given us. Pray that you bless as we study your word and work our way through the book of Ecclesiastes. I pray that you'd use it in our lives. Help us to dwell on, to live in, to understand the truth of your word. In Jesus' name, amen.